So I think we will get started and discuss about more types of injection.
Yes, sir.
Uh, yeah, can we go to the next slide? Or
Cool. That's the ethics.
yes. Um, and as discussed earlier, we're gonna just study today about template injection. We're gonna try to understand how CSV injection is a thing, how few companies consider it as a higher a critical, how few companies don't actually find it important at all, and how we feel that you could use CSV injection to exploit and then find vulnerabilities and actually use it for your red team exercises, etc. So we're going to talk a bit more about that, and we will play along with some command injection and talk a bit about LFI.
Awesome. So moving on. So probably I'll just start off with something about template injections, and then I'll hand it over to Abhi. So we have a couple of things that we want to cover. So before we start off, perhaps it's a good time to understand what templates are. So perhaps I can try to get guess from the room of how many people have used templates before in any backend languages of your choice or front end. If you have used it, then you probably are familiar with some of these problems. But if you've never used templates before, it's a good thing to probably start with what templates are. So there are two kinds of templates. Naturally, there's server-side and client-side templates. Templates are typically language specific. Depending upon frameworks that you're using, templates can work differently. Yes, ASP.NET counts. And given they are all from a different language, they could be very different from one another. The way and what each template functionalities does is also different. So it's quite difficult to come up with saying that this is the good way to do, this is a bad way to do for templates, because it's very dependent upon which language, which framework, what you're using, which versions you're using. There's a lot of different discrepancies within that. So, but ideally, templates are nothing but purely a model through which you can do some amount of operations to simplify your backend and front end renderings. So sometimes you can build complex HTML code in the background purely using templates, so that they could be assembled. Like you could build your side menu, your headers, everything separately, and then just merge them together through templates. You can inject some of the values you're getting from the database and just pump it straight to that. Or you can do it in the client side, which has nothing to do with server side. You can take the input, you can mishmash, do whatever you want to do with it, and then display it for more dynamic effects, right? So obviously templates are very useful in that scenario, and it's very widely used. In fact, if you have been playing around with any of those challenge applications that been thrown at you, you're pretty much been using templates without being aware of it. Templates are very widely used everywhere. But with such kinds of easiness, there's always some issues that is associated with it. So let's look at them. Let's break them down into server side and client side, look at examples of it. And naturally, I'm taking Python because that's typically what my app is written in. So I use that. But again, you can use any language. They have their own templating models. So from a server-side template perspective, templates can be more than just a way in which you render a page. It can do some operations for you. Some arithmetic operations can be done, or it can even run some JavaScript functions for you, or even run native functions for you and give you the results directly, instead of you needing to make calls to write native function calls to do that. For example, getting date time and stuff like that need not necessarily be like you have to write a whole function to compute those stuff. You can just pop it straight into your template itself, which will compute it for you. And it's really great because half of the more commonly used functions can be just strapped straight into your HTML or your CSHTML, which will do that for you. That's one of the bigger advantages of it. With client side, actually is gaining a lot of popularity with single page applications. and where the rarity to go back and get information from backend is reducing. You do a lot more in the front end itself in your browser. Once again, depending upon what framework you're using or what libraries you're using for the front end, you might have very different functionalities. But typically, you can recognize something as a template when you see those flowery brackets, as you see with the client templates, which usually specifies that there is some amount of template there. So that's just a brief view of it. So let's start to see what they are. Typically, template injection as a concept happens simply because templates have these capabilities to accept any user input. And if you provide user input without any validations, you're going to end up having the same kinds of problems you have seen with injection throughout. You just modify the behavior of what the template is supposed to do. Depending upon, again, the template background, library you're using, you could do a lot more, and you can even do remote code execution with it. And that's why it's extremely critical. Or you can have cross-site scripting. Again, if you're familiar with it, that's great. If not, we'll be talking about this in 2 weeks' time. But nonetheless, to give you an overview of what it can do. So given the classifications as server side and client side, we probably have to look at them differently, because the client side template injection would be with more single page applications, typically take into consideration like Angular JS or React JS, if you have used them before. They are very popular, and they tend to have quite a lot of template capabilities built in. From a server side perspective, in these examples, I try to focus more on Python templates, Ginger templates, but that's no specification that this is only in these scenarios the problem could happen. It could be across any templating systems. From a server-side template, the first and the most important thing to be aware of is if you're providing a user input that's going to the back end, using that input straight into rendering something in the page that you're going to return back to the client, you have a problem right over there, because that's essentially how you reflect user data back through template with damages being done at the back end. So it could be from getting something to execute like an RCE in the back end, or making that execution and fetch some data back to you through the same page that is coming through. And that means you inject a code, say, fetch me this data, and it executes in the backend, puts the results back into the same HTML page that is going to return back to you. So you'll be able to fetch your data back through the same page you're supposed to be viewing. So think about it. You can even move from that perspective to say, if somehow you're able to inject some code here, which directly goes into some backend functionality that's fetching you the data, that could be SQL, or it could be API calls, or any of those backend, you'll be able to break through and do more damage than what you're intended to do. So that's one of the important things to remember. So naturally, you'll have to be very careful depending upon what you're expecting as a user input. Having good client-side validations as well as server-side validations will help reducing this set of attacks. So let's look at, we'll be doing a demo on this, and that will be this payload we'll be using. But I want to actually kind of point out what that payload does instead of just copy pasting the payload. Actually, I'm curious, if someone looks, if you look at this, other than the red thing that comes out quite easily and you can identify what that does, what exactly is this doing? This function, can someone guess?
You can unmute yourself and guess your answer.
Just reading a file that the user inputs.
Correct. Mm-hmm. So that's the one, that's the easy part, right? So, but you have to remember, not necessarily an error. So what you have to remember over here is that this is a backend code. You're executing a whole backend code in a template engine. So it's not going to be like you can import some library directly into a template engine, because it's a template engine that's rendering it for you instead of you directly calling a Python function. So there is some discrepancies. For example, if you want to import something like say, for example, popen from os.com. It's quite easy in Python. You just do import os and you write 2 lines of code, you're done. But over here, template engines does not allow you to directly import something. Instead, you have to be able to go into the base of the template engine and see what are all the libraries that were built into Python that can be used by the template engine. That's what you're doing. You're going to the base of the subclass of the template engine and searching through to find those that have been marked with warnings. So warnings are the ones that are essentially system calls that could be used or something that will directly interact with the operating system. That's why it comes with a warning, because you're not supposed to be calling it from a template engine. But in this scenario, I'm exactly doing that. I'm looking for those. And whichever I'm able to filter out as modules that are meant with warning, from that I'm pulling in specifically the import OS module, which is standard built into any Python subsystem. And from there, I'm calling popen. For those who are not aware of that, it's just a process open. And popen will allow you to execute any command. In this case, it's Linux, so a cat command at etc password and fetch the results for you. This whole thing is executed by the template engine, and the result is stored automatically in the generated HTML itself. So you don't have to actually make a call to the backend or do any such things. It's just being done by the template engine itself. It's really interesting to see how that works. Now, if I were to show you this, the same the code that I talked about, I'm just copying this. I've done a better thing than what Abby was doing, copy pasting from the presentation. I copied it earlier on so that it doesn't come up with some weird. Okay, so once I submit, boom, the whole thing just executes and just dumps the whole thing, because HTML got rendered, and the rendering is essentially just that output of that whole etc password. You don't have to see. It's not something that has anything important for me in this scenario, but that's typically how dangerous it is. In this scenario, I'm not doing an RCE, but if you can do a popen and execute this, you can completely execute any command that is possible depending upon what level your application is running in. Assume your application is running as a root user, you can do far more. At the moment, I am running as root user, so I'm able to see etc password, but you could do far more depending upon the level in which your application is running. So it's super critical to be aware what its capabilities are. If you allow someone to put in inputs like this, you're going to have plenty of issues down the line. So you have to be very careful. While it is extremely powerful, it should never allow inputs like this to be fetched to the backend.
I've got a question.
That's the, sorry, yes?
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, how come it's executing what you've put in? Like, like, why is it so that when you put that template injection in, it executes it and not like throws it into the query database? Because aren't you doing isn't it like a search engine? Or sorry, like a search query in the website that we saw?
So that's essentially, yes, it's a search query. So all that search query does is when I put this template in, which is like ABC, I'm searching for say ABC and press enter, it goes to the backend and it looks at that, and in the page where it's injecting in, it says you searched for and this value what you're giving in, and that is coming under those flowery brackets. And what that means is when the moment the rendering engine looks at it, says you searched for, and then this flowery bracket, it goes and executes what's inside the flowery bracket. That's our code. And that code is now looking for popen and dumping the data that is coming out of it straight back into that. So it's overwriting even the HTML code that originally existed and just dump the whole content of that file back into that page that it got rendered and that got returned back to you. It's an HTML page, yes, but the baseline of HTML is completely gone. That's why you don't see the return of any proper value. Instead, what you see is just the dump of that coming back. So in other words, all it's doing is, had it been a normal search function, it would have just written back with an HTML with a value that you searched for this. And probably in my case, in my demo, I don't actually search for anything. I just search for and I give back the same term that I'm searching for. In this scenario, because that's a template, it expands, executes, puts the value back into the same page where you called it from and returns back to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just to double check, it worked because in this case it returned like to you, you searched for blah, and because the blah was in like the squiggly brackets template form,
Yeah,
it injected what you put in and which executed it.
correct, exactly. So it just rewrote the whole HTML page with that value that it returned back, because it's a PO process open and you copy the whole cat of that value back there. So it just execute the whole thing and copied the full value back to you.
So it wouldn't like reflect. So if the website didn't try to reflect what you route, what you written out, or what you entered into it, it wouldn't have worked. The injection.
Come again? If
So if you if sorry if the
reflected,
website didn't try to like to print out like to reflect what you wrote, right? Because you
yeah,
wrote like if you wrote like hello in the search query, if you
yeah.
didn't try to say you searched for hello, if that thing wasn't there, it wouldn't have worked.
I'm just okay. Let me.
Did that make sense?
I don't think I'm getting your question correctly.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think the question is essentially like, if the website we're looking at trying to attack wasn't reflecting back what we were searching, this exploit wouldn't work, right? Because there's no massage task. There's no
Oh,
tags
right.
being executed, right? Yeah.
Correct. Yes, it has to because in this scenario you want that value to come back to you. So if the output result is not coming back to you, if that's not the intention, then you will not get the data back. But you'll still be able to execute something in the backend, and RC would be still possible. But you might have to figure out a different way to get your data out, probably not through this reflection back.
Okay, yeah, thanks, and thank you, Shrey.
Cool. There were a couple of questions. There's quite a few.
Yeah, so I think the question is more around like how we initially would check if it's vulnerable to template injection. Like the best way to look for, I'm pretty sure Varun has content for this in the upcoming lectures, but the easiest way, yeah, as someone said in the comments, right? Like you would look for flower brackets 1+1 or 2 or 2*2. You would try to run a simple mathematical function just to see if it's working or not. And once you're able to do it, that's when you would try to guess how the template is working and then go ahead and do what Warren has done.
Correct. And another thing you have to remember with template injection is that depending upon, again, the engine, that's why I'm with, oh shit. Are you guys able to still see? My screen got locked.
Yeah, yeah, we are able to see.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I just forgot where I was at.
A bit further, yeah.
All you have to do, or things that you need to be careful about, is what's being injected. Now, remember, depending upon the template engine that you are using, things could be quite different. So most template engines would not take an encoded version of the same data. So if you send an encoded version of the data, it will not execute as you see over there. It would treat it as a data, and it'll search the whole thing like a string. So if you all you have to do in that scenario is to ensure that it's encoded when it's being sent across, any data that is being sent across. So why would anyone want to put information there if it is just a search string, which is supposed to be just a bunch of characters and should not have any of these special characters? Simply encode them and your backend will not respond to that. Or in some scenarios, you might want, if you do want to allow for whatever reason, some specific commands that you want to inject through this, then you can typically also have whitelisting capabilities to say what you're allowing in and what you're not. But ideally, in this scenario, the template injection, the whole template, what needs to be executed was written as a user input. That should never be allowed. That flowery braces thing is only something that is for you, that is hard-coded into your page that you will execute in the backend when the server is rendering. But you will not let that to be added into the HTML page where it gets rendered because the input was provided that way. Does that make sense? There are no challenges from template injection. So I don't know whether that's good or bad for you guys. but yeah. Uh,
I think if you want to practice template injection, like there is, I'll put a link on the chat. There is this really cool playground for like Angular.js. Um, so yeah.
Actually, yes, AngularJS is a great place to play around with them. Actually, I'm going to come to that actually, the next thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know what? I would recommend this. Like, I'm not sure how many of you are comfortable or familiar with Python. Are you? I'm
A few
assuming.
of them. So for a few of them would have done computer science or like programming course or lecture before attending this one, but
Okay.
most of them might not have programming background. So it's always nice to assume that people don't have a programming background. At least I try to do it. Yeah.
So what I was about to suggest is the best way to learn about templates and its capabilities is to actually write a simple, this is server side, I'm talking server side purely, right? From the server side, pick up any language of your choice. If you take .NET or whatever, there are templates for all of them. You have exploits specific to each of those parts. So you could just pick up a language of your choice and look around it. Actually, it's worth even writing a simple one single page application that does only, all it does is takes the input in and what you can put it as input and how you can render with it. Someone asked a question somewhere back in the thing, flowery bracket 1 + 1 summation, that also works. It automatically computes the value and gives to you. So all that kind of stuff works. Yeah, Ginger is a very good thing. You can do quite a lot of things with Ginger. So if you're familiar with it, definitely look at it. React, I'm reading through very quickly the comments.
Another thing that's worth mentioning is like, if depending on the type of template that's used or depending on the type of technology that's used by a web app, like sometimes you could look at what the version of, say we are talking about AngularJS, right? You could look at what the version of AngularJS they're using. And if they're using like an outdated, vulnerable version of AngularJS, then all you have to do is like pretty much copy and paste the payloads, or like pretty much, you know that they're vulnerable. You know that their templates, the way they handle your input are vulnerable. So just by knowing what version it is, you can quickly go ahead and escalate the way you test for this and find vulnerabilities.
I just realized that while I was doing this thing, I was planning to put that different versions, what payloads work, and I completely forgot when I actually did. Sorry.
That's okay. I will find the link and put it in the chat for students.
With React.js vulnerable to template. Okay, I have lots of stories on that. I'll come to that a little later on React. That's client side. So far we talked server side. Let's look at client side. Now, what's the difference? The concept of templating is exactly the same, just that in server side you have far more capabilities, like because it can directly go and look at your you can take lots of modules like popen and kind of these kinds of stuff. But when you do templates in client side, it's what your browser can do for you. So that is JavaScript. So whatever JavaScript can do is what it can do. So it's something that is extremely crucial to understand that there is difference. That's the fundamental difference between it. There, the operating system over here, it's from client side, it's JavaScript, what JavaScript can do. So once again, the templating is going to be different depending upon what framework you're using, whether you're using JavaScript, you're using Angular, React frameworks, which versions, everything has its own slight differences the way it does. So from a client side, the bigger danger over here will obviously not be remote code execution, but it'll more be something to do with client side execution. So that means something like XSS would be a primary problem with respect to client side injections. So typically the aim would be to somehow manipulate the DOM because it's a single page application. You try to insert some user value directly without any sanitization and thereby achieve something like an XSS. So that's DOM based. Now, again, if you're not familiar with what XSS is and DOM based, don't have to worry. We'll talk about this in 2 weeks time. But if you're familiar with it, I'm just bringing that across. Now, here's a look at a client-side template injection, very similar to what we looked at, but in here we are going to look at AngularJS. Now, this is again specific to a version. I can't remember on top of my head which version this is, but that is there is lots of different payloads that are available depending upon the version you're using. So in this scenario, there is a concept called sandbox. Maybe first I'll talk about that before we go ahead with it. There is two popular frameworks from a client-side perspective. One is Angular, the other is React. Angular had a history of vulnerabilities coming from a really long time. And so typically, if you talk to a security engineer, they'll say, oh, Angular is bad and dangerous. It is true to a certain level, but they have definitely improved over the period of time. It's far more secure. And the other part of the equation is React. Now, React is known, it's like the most popular.
Doctor.
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, my bad. I was trying to share something with the students.
Oh, it's okay. The other part of with respect to client side is the React part. Now, React is popular and everybody says React does not have any vulnerabilities. For a long time, I believe that too, and that was my recommendation to a lot of people: use React because there's not much of security research on it. And what's surprising is that that's exactly the reason you don't see a lot of vulnerabilities. Typically, historically, so far, React-based library, if you call it library, it's not a framework, it's a library, has only had two major vulnerabilities that has come through, which has been fixed. So in that way, they are very popular in terms of writing good code and having safe scenarios. Obviously, there are some dangerous things, like if you use functions that simply says dangerously setting inner HTML, that kind of functions allows you to specifically set dangerous code into that. And sometimes you need to use them. And if you use them in those scenarios, you have to be extremely careful about what you're putting in there as input. If a user input is going into one of those dangerously set functions, you have a problem. But again, that's the concept behind it. It's a whole different factor the moment you start including plugins for your React framework. Now, the maximum vulnerabilities that you will find in React will come from the plugins, third-party plugins that have been given to you. And the number of third-party plugins that you would add to your existing library in most typical projects is quite a lot. At least 30% of the functionality comes through third-party libraries that you add to it. The moment you start adding to that, you're going to have these sorts of problems. So it's the reason you don't hear much about them is because unlike Angular, which is considered as a whole framework, React problems are specified or researchers put it under a specific library. So if you search for React.js vulnerabilities, well, you're not going to find many because the React.js base framework is pretty safe. It's the additional libraries that you add in, because the libraries internally do a lot of inner dangerously set inner HTML kind of functions, and you do not know which of your inputs is being used like that by the library. That's the problem. So coming to this, so in here for an Angular aspect, I did talk about this is definitely a vulnerable version of the library that I'm using. And it has this particular construct called constructor. Does anyone know what it is? Have you heard of this before? Okay, so one important thing about Angular is that Angular kind of does not allow you to execute any script directly into the framework. You have to actually define it, because it kind of considers something like a sandbox, which says that I should understand what you're trying to execute. Even a JavaScript function has to be defined inside the sandbox for it to be execute successfully. So in this scenario, that the whole scope of that is determined by something called as $scope. That's your main scope of your sandbox. And that has some built-in functionalities in it. One such functionality is called a constructor. So it's actually another object inside the scope object, and that also has a method called constructor. That's the reason in your curly braces or flower braces, however you call them, constructor is essentially just a capability for you to be able to call that function. and you can just pass in an JavaScript function which it could execute directly, and that's pretty much what it is. And that particular constructor was later on removed from AngularJS because of this kind of an exploit. But typically, almost all exploits you've seen in AngularJS comes down to built-in functions not properly controlled and can be used by the person who's exploiting by picking up the right methods to call inside the sandbox itself. Okay, let's do the same. Do this. Okay, I'm going to also say something after this. It's also the same code, does the same thing. It's just a reflective.
Actually, Varun, I was going to say, can we first maybe try to do flower braces 1+1 and see, just see the response? Because I know one of the students mentioned it, so sorry to put you on the spot. But yeah, as you can see, like this is the first step, or this is like one of the first hints that you could look for. And the moment you do curly braces like 1+1, it basically does the sum and shows you. So like now you can then go ahead and start exploiting it.
Yeah, actually this is quite standard formats which you can start using. It's quite good. So you do this, it goes on to execute your payload. Now, while that looks fairly tempting and there's quite a lot that can be done, there are some limitations under what constructor can do. At this point, I'm probably not going to go into that because then we are going into an Angular discussion completely. That's not the point of the topic, but it's quite an interesting subject by itself, why Angular does that. It's worth reading about it. There's lots of debates about why Angular was designed to do this.
Yeah, the talk that I actually shared on the chat, like once Varun finishes the cross-site scripting lecture in a couple of weeks, I know his, I think his internet is playing around. He literally got stuck there. Do watch that talk. It is actually one of my favorite talks where there's this researcher called Mario Hidrich, where he passionately talks about how he hates AngularJS and why he thinks how it's not designed well. And I think after that talk, there have been several changes that have been made to AngularJS, and I'm trying to search for words so that Varun can come back and fill me up, but it looks like he got disconnected. Great. Let me share the screen and continue. And like, hopefully it's gonna join us in a few minutes. Sorry guys, just give me like a minute. Three, two, one. All right. Let me start sharing my screen.
We've
Share my screen.
we've done pretty well, however many weeks without someone dropping out. So
Yeah, that's what I was thinking actually.
I'm unprepared for it.
There we go. Obviously, I don't have Warren's demo, but oh, hello. But yeah, let's quickly go. So now that we talked about AngularJS client-side template injection, also this is a good segue into your next week's topic / the topic that's upcoming, where we'll be talking about XSS, cross-site scripting, and a bunch of other client-side browser-related, JavaScript-related vulnerabilities. Since you have 2 weeks before we start that lecture, if you're interested, one thing I could recommend you is try to go ahead and look for JavaScript 101 tutorials. If you guys would like, I'd share a couple of them on the Slack later, and then you guys can have a look at them. Because playing around with JavaScript and going through JavaScript 101 would kind of make your cross-site scripting lectures much more easier, and it'll also make them more fun, and then you'll be able to understand them and in a much more detail. If you don't have time and if you're not able to do it, that is still fine. I'm pretty sure the content we have is aimed at people who know JavaScript and people who don't know JavaScript too. So don't stress about it too much. So the recommendations, right? So every time you see something like a client-side template injection, remember one of the most common things, one of the most simplest things that we could do is actually input validation, but quite often we don't think about it. And then you need to think about how you are basically using a user input and creating dynamic templates. So and like to not try to mix server-side templates with client-side templates. Quite often when I'm testing for vulnerabilities, and especially if you have a lot of templates in your website, then it is quite often very easy for you to like mix and server-side templates with the client-side templates, and that way your templating engine doesn't work properly, or like you might run into errors and suddenly you'll be forced to like change your entire architecture or something like that. So please also follow the framework recommendations, and please look at the version of the template framework that you're currently using, etc. This kind of takes me to the next kind of vulnerability, which is called CSV injection. I'm gonna quickly run through it. CSV, comma separated values. CSV injection is a very interesting attack, or a very interesting injection, which only started getting exploited, say, in the last 4 years. So how the vulnerability works, right? Say you have a website on which you have a table and you have multiple fields in that table, right? So when you're extracting that table in a .csv format, what happens is if you're extracting all the data from the web page in a .csv format without any validation, the content gets extracted directly in a plain text in .csv format. And when you open this .csv in your Excel, indirectly, if someone's injecting, instead of their saying their first name is Abhijit, if they're injecting, hey, my first name is equal to sum of 1 equal to 1 plus 1, then your application is actually extracting that macro. And when you're opening it in Excel, suddenly that macro would get executed. Sounds very simple, right? Which means if you as a customer create an account with your first name as is equal to sum of 1 plus 1, someone on the back end or some admin, when they're trying to pull or extract your data, you are injecting macros onto their Excel, which means sum of 1 equal to 1 is a simple example. But when you think about it, you could actually get access to their CMD. Like, for example, this is how it would look like. And when you extract it, like the formula would actually get executed. But the formula that actually hurts the most is DDE, which is called dynamic data exchange. You could use Excel's dynamic data exchange to actually execute command. And on your left-hand side, as you can see, like instead of giving 1 comma 1 is equal to 1 plus 1, I could give like command /c /c notepad blah blah. And when I try to open that on my Excel, you would see that you can directly upload an Excel on their computer, which means by having absolutely no access to someone's computer, by just filling a web form with like malicious values, like something like this, and if the application is vulnerable to the CSV injection, an employee of an organization who is extracting your data is suddenly vulnerable to DDE or like CSV injection. Now, the fix is actually very simple. Every time you see a value or a field which starts with is equal to plus, minus, or at the rate, these are your 4 special characters, right? Every time any field or any cell starts with these 4 characters, basically you either put a space in front of it or you put a single quote. By doing that, then automatically when you're extracting this onto your Excel, suddenly all your fields would no longer be vulnerable. Let me quickly show you an example, right? This is my Excel, right? So if I give is equal to sum of 1 plus 1 and I click on enter, you can see that automatically it comes as 2, which means if your first name is sum of 1 plus 1 and you're extracting this on an Excel, your macro is being injected. But if I simply put a space and I click on enter, suddenly it doesn't work. So if you're using web pages, or if you're having pages of functionalities where you are necessarily exporting data that is available on the web page into a CSV, then you would want to make sure that you have this kind of validation. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is another form of injection that quite often is missed out. And like I said, this is a form of injection that has only been found out in the last like 2 to 3 years. It's a very simple and basic attack, but you think about it, the impact is quite huge. Like you can literally get access to someone's cmd.exe, and then like just by not being in the organization at all, just by submitting malicious values, like you could pretty much get access to like someone's computer, which kind of brings to an kind of end of most of the content that we have planned for today's lecture. However, I thought I would do something kind of interesting with you guys today, for which so what I've done is I have a challenge for you guys, slash I have a demo for you guys, for which I would like you guys to actually play slash test with me. Let me quickly show you the URL. Give me like a minute. Yeah, test. It's a safe environment, so you don't have to worry. So this is the URL. I'm copying and pasting it on the Zoom chat. So there are a total of 3 flags that you need to find, or you would be able to find by exploiting this functionality. For the first 5 minutes, I will pretty much do anything that you guys ask me to do on this page. I would like you guys to kindly unmute and start talking. And once you start talking, I would pretty much want you to help me or guide me in finding a vulnerability. If anyone has found at least 2 flags, please call out, and then we can kind of take it from there. Just to make things super easy for you, I have enabled errors and warnings. So you will, if you do something slightly wrong or slightly dodgy, you will be seeing an error message. So yeah, you could use that error message and kind of go ahead and start finding vulnerabilities. And I'm sorry that you're on mobile, but you could also use a mobile browser to exploit this. I'm going to give you a very small hint. You would want to use the things that we discussed in today's lecture and on Monday's lecture. So yeah, do you guys want to tell me what to do? So as you can see, if I can give a simple this thing, it says please enter a URL. So if I enter a URL like google.com, it's going to render google.com on my page. So it's basically a URL renderer, similar to most websites. Sometimes like they ask you for a URL, or like you upload a PDF and your PDF gets rendered, etc. So yeah, you can unmute yourself and start sharing things. Please go ahead. I'll stop talking.
Hi, Tim here. Just can we like edit the page source or to get rid of the URL? Because I think you can't, if you try not enter a URL, it'll block you.
Yep.
Yeah, right. So we're trying to break it. We don't really care about how we break it. We just do it.
So if you change the type from URL to text and input,
You just delete the type. That's what I
or
did.
just delete it, yeah.
So I make it as text.
But in inspect, sorry, not in the source.
Yeah,
You have to
yeah,
inspect.
Uh,
sorry.
It's okay.
And you can just delete the type equals blah blah. You can leave it as text, but
And
So
then
that way
just
I
try
could-
and enter anything.
and then
Cool.
do like flag.txt or something. Surely
Sure. Let me try to do that.
you're gonna have to reset your thing in the inspector, I think, as well, because it will reset every time. But if I was designing it with flag.txt, yeah, there we go.
So that's flag number 1.
Sorry, how did you do that?
So one way you could do it is like, this is an example of a simple client side. No, these flags are not real, and they're
Oh,
not a part of your challenge, but these are a part of us learning together. Sorry, guys. So the first thing is bypassing client-side validation. As you saw, like there was a client-side validation, but to be able to bypass it, like the simple thing you want to do is like modify type URL to text, and then you can search for flag.txt, and once you do it, like it shows you flag. So just to give you more hints, there's also a file called as flag.png. I would want to see if anyone is able to actually download it. And like I said, there are in total 3 flags. I'm curious to see. Another hint, someone was mentioning on the chat, is say when I search for http://google.com, you could see that it shows there's a URL parameter in the URL, and this parameter also doesn't have any validation. Oops. Yeah, this parameter doesn't have any validation. So you could actually hit the get method and then look for things. But if you were looking for URLs and URL parameter, what would you do? Or what would be a vulnerability that you would look for? Any ideas?
Is there a way to see if the URL returns like encoded data? I don't like for SSRF.
Sure. So
I don't.
what
I don't.
would you
Re-
like?
I don't remember. I remember seeing it in the lecture. I don't remember how, but you could see like what data was being returned.
Right.
Somewhere.
One way you could test is, as you saw, when you try to hit google.com on port 443, you saw that the response was valid. So you could do a port scan. This is called cross-site port scanning using SSRF. So instead of hitting port 443 or port 8080, you could hit port 21. And you would see that when I try to hit port 21, it's going to take time in loading, but eventually it won't open because obviously that port is not enabled. So this is also like another small technique or proof of concept that you can submit to organizations when you're looking for SSRF. Because basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to hit google.com:21 on port 21 using this web server. So basically you're trying to force request on the server side, right? So like, yeah, that is also not possible. So someone found woot SSRF. Do you want to explain us how to do it? To do two is done. Sorry, yeah. Do you want to explain me how you did it?
I used the PHP stream wrapper to download it as basic-4. So I did PHP : bunch of stuff.
Okay.
I did PHP : filter /convert.base64-encode /resource equals flag.png.
Sure. Do you wanna send it to me on the chat and also explain it for the benefit of everyone else?
I'm on my phone, so this is going to take a while to print out.
Oh, right. Oh, no. Okay, cool. Do you want to explain us why you use that technique?
So if you type in something garbage into the input field, it gives you an error that says something about like file get contents or something like that.
Yep.
And basically PHP has a bunch of really, I don't know, kind of really dumb features. So the way it treats input to like file get contents is if it's HTTP // it's going to go and like get that web page. If it's file : // it's going to get that file off the file system. And then there's a bunch of like special like prefixes, one of which is PHP // which lets you execute a bunch of like simple filters and functions on a resource. So PHP : / filter tells PHP to get a filter. Convert.base64 encode tells it to base64 encode something. And then resource equals flag.png tells it to base64 encode flag.png.
That is really cool. Yeah. So I think you pretty much summed it. I don't have to explain it. But then one thing I can recommend the students is like when you see warnings or error messages and it tells you what the function is, one of the easiest way that you could go ahead and exploit is actually by understanding what this function does. And as to do is, dude, what's your name?
Chen.
Chan. Yeah, as Chan mentioned, like if you're understanding how this function actually works in PHP, then you can simply go ahead, start using PHP filter, and pretty much get access to like any resource that's available in this directory. Also, if you remember in our previous lecture, we learned how to do SSRF, and already someone mentioned in the chat, like if you use file colon forward slash, it says it gives you a different error message, which kind of gives you a hint that it failed to open the stream, and it says like the operation is not permitted, and it gives you a directory. I do want to stop here. If someone has used that technique, can you please unmute yourself and help me find the flag? This is where I'm like total noob, right? Like you guys have to help me find the flag. Teach me. Has anyone got file colon forward slash working?
Can you like repeat the file, like the whole command? Because I think I was like halfway quite past that.
Sure. URL, like if you're looking at my screen,
Yeah.
I have my screen. So URL is equal to file colon forward slash. As we discussed in the previous lecture, sometimes you don't necessarily have to use HTTP protocol. You could use like protocols like FTP or sorry, file or Gopher, etc. And using them, you can still get access to the resources.
Oh, okay. Right.
That is correct, Evan. That is the original page. You are very close. So Evan posted something in the chat.
So how would you guess what Evan posted? Like,
So, okay, that's a really good question, right? So you want to guess where this specific HTML file is hosted. Now, what this error message says, gives you information, is like it is giving you the directory on where this page is hosted. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to run this PHP code in the specific directory. So like if you simply copy and paste this and try to access this file, because with file colon forward slash, you're trying to access this file, right? If you click it, you can actually load this resource on this specific page. So at this point, you just have to play with the directory and then be able to identify where the flag is.
yeah, that makes sense.
Now, 9 out of 10 times when you're testing real life web applications, you won't have the error message, but I've only enabled the error message in this case so that it's easier for you to look at the error messages and try to figure out. Yeah, I think file.png is broken, but that's okay. As long as you can see a broken PNG file rendered, I think you're good. Maybe in a minute, I'll show you guys how you can get access to this flag, and then I'll show you another super hidden flag. If I were you, I wouldn't try to copy and paste what's given in the chat by others, but I would rather try to debug it and try to, try to basically understand what the functions are doing. All right, so as you can see right now, we know that using file colon forward slash, you are able to access resources that are hosted in the specific folder or directory. Now, if I remove index.php, just to, like I said, just to make it easier for you, I do have flag.txt on this page. Once I open it, you can see that this resource is now accessible on this page. Now, this is SSRF, but similar to this, there is another attack called as local file inclusion. Local file inclusion also works on a similar concept where you're trying to include files that are hosted locally onto the web server. And at that point, like once you are able to include those files, you will then go ahead and start accessing other files that are there that are hosted in your web structure, and then kind of eventually get access to like /etc/password. Yes, Evan. I don't think /etc/password is supposed to work, but if someone can get it to work, yeah, I will definitely make sure you get some bonus points. Like I will fight with even Richard Buckland if needed, and I'll make sure you get some bonus points if you actually get /etc/password. I don't know what I'm promising right now. There is also another flag. Yeah, Shrey, you're right. Like you can't really get there /etc/password. That's why I was like, I'll make sure you guys get bonus points.
Wouldn't that be unethical then, if it's not us? Do we have the written permission to try and break the etc. password?
No, that's why you're not supposed to do it. But maybe I have a file.
Recorded?
Maybe I have a file which is called /etc/password. Just to troll you guys. And maybe that's the hardest flag. I mean, obviously I'm your lecturer. I'm not gonna make you guys do something unethical, right? Then we all get into trouble. I'm abhijetical. I'm very ethical. So I'll give you guys another hint. You might want to look at temp folder to find another flag. If someone wants to give me any ideas, or has anyone already done it? Maybe I'll wait for 1 more minute and then I will quickly show you guys. The trick is to look at the URL structure. Yeah, there's nothing in the cookies, guys. Wait, is the recording actually paused?
No, it's on.
So.
I was just checking.
Yeah, cool. If you were on a Linux system, normally your HTML files would be hosted on /var/ww. If your HTML files are hosted on /var/ww, where is your /temp file? If I were you, that's what I'd be thinking.
So is it just one back from public HTML and then into temp?
So public HTML,
Sure.
another temp has another flag, yes, but that's not the final flag. So that's correct. Like if you.
Oh no, go back another one, like .. /. We'll just get rid of that, I guess. Yeah.
Oops.
The temp directory exists, but I can't see anything inside of it.
There you go. I think someone already found it. Yay! Who is it? I think Jamal and to do some. Yeah. As you can see, remember what I told you, right? Like /var/ww. So it's like behind two directories. So when you're looking at public underscore HTML/root, you're already in like two directories. So you have to do dot dot forward slash dot dot forward slash. That means you're going behind by 2 folders, and then you're accessing slash temp, and then you're accessing slash fact.txt. Now, if you're doing real life pen testing, or if you're doing OSCP or like real life bug bounty or like CTFs, always remember to have a look at the temp folder, because temp folder is like pretty cool. And especially when you're trying to do privilege escalation and you're trying to run a code and you don't have permissions to run any code, then what you would want to do is like upload your code into slash temp file and run it on slash temp file, and then basically run your exploit and do a privilege escalation. Yeah, so this was a basic couple of demos I wanted to show you. As you could see, this is a combination of 1, SSRF, 2, how PHP functions work, and 3, also understanding how LFI and like file structures work. LFI is generally one of our favorite challenges when it comes to CTFs, just because one, it's slightly hard to exploit, but 2, it's also slightly fun because you play around with the directory structure and you also learn so much about the operating system that you're looking at. Yeah, there should be another flag, but then I'll show that to you later, or like I'll share the URL. But yeah, the other flag is flag.png. Like I can quickly go and type flag.png, but when I do that, yeah, it doesn't get rendered properly. I kind of messed up, but cool.
It wasn't that the root SSRF one? Because
no, I have a flag.png and I also have a flag.txt.
No, SRF was the flag.png.
Yeah.
You use the PHP to convert the PNG file to base64, then copy that base64 and do an online base64 to PNG displayer.
And
Sure.
the image had that flag.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, cool. Sorry. Looks like I must have got confused. Cool. Do you guys have any questions? I just wanted to do this really small exercise challenge because I wanted to see what your approach is. And at this point, you can pretty much like get access to the PHP file and download the code. I'll share the code if you guys want, but like it's pretty straightforward. With that, we kind of come to an end of today's lecture. So do you guys have any questions or anything you want to ask? If not, see you guys. Sorry.
Who wrote the letters question for this one of the week subdomains?
Adam?
It's a good question.
Yep, that's me.
I think it's like
that was
the most satisfying question. Yeah, I think it's the most satisfying question I've done all term.
Thank you.
Nice.
Good.
Is this the LFI to our RCE one, Adam?
Yep.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
That was surely an extended flag.
Yeah.
Cool.
One of the flags I'd say is maybe a mish to hard, and the other's like probably quite hard.
If that's your favorite satisfying challenge, maybe you could write a report about it. That'd be pretty cool. I'd love to see a report on that. Again, just another mention, if you guys are taking the extended course, and when you're writing your vulnerability report or your pen test report, you would want to mention at least one of your extended flags to be able to get that credit / mark saying, hey, yeah, I've done the extended course and this is the flag and this is my write-up on how I got the extended flag. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask us on Slack or please drop us an email. With that, did you have anything else you wanted to mention, Varun?
I was not sure that anyone had any question when I dropped off. So if there are, actually, I can't even remember what I was talking about when I dropped off. So
Oh, no.
You were talking about AngularJS and like client-side AngularJS
right.
injection, and I kind of continued and talked about CSV injection and told them about CSV injection, and
Cool.
then we started doing the demo.
Yeah, that particular CSV injection thing, if you just copy the same thing and do it in your own laptop, it'll work.
Yeah.
It's a straightforward injection.
Yeah, and then please be very careful. Like, don't try it on like hotels or like hospitality websites. Like, I was doing bug bounty for like one of them, and then it was crazy because like most of these hospitality or food chains, they use simple applications where they just pull all the orders or customers page into a CSV, and like yeah, they were real bad and really vulnerable. So yeah, please be very careful. Please don't misuse the information that you gain in this course. Um, and I will leave the URL for you guys to play around for maybe the next couple of hours. Feel free to play around. There is another file which is called /etc/PASSWD, but you have to slightly play around with the characters. If someone's able to solve that, send me a message on Slack. But otherwise, thanks a lot. I will, this is probably one of my final lectures. I will be passively present and then enjoying the lectures with you guys from next week. So I'll be more active on chat and then like maybe drop more memes with everyone else. But otherwise, thank you. If you guys don't have any questions, I will end the meeting for everyone.